Now, we would like to welcome our keynote speaker for the day, who will start us on a journey showing us how investment and innovation can drive forward our net zero goals. As CEO of the Net Zero Technology Centre, we open with an incredibly inspiring leader in the energy sector, driving innovation for a sustainable future. With a distinguished career spanning engineering, technology, and digital transformation, she is a passionate advocate for change in the energy transition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Chief Executive Officer of the Net Zero Technology Centre, Myrtle Dawes.
So thank you. I'm really delighted to be here today. I have my comfort blanket, which is my notes, because I'm of an age now where I can't be reliably counted on to remember everything that I want to say. So I think before I start, I'll just give you a little canter about myself. So, I started working in oil and gas actually back in '91. I worked on the Seminole Fields, which was the Forties field for BP. And even then, when I joined, we were actually talking about peak oil. We were actually talking about transition. It wasn't called an energy transition. It was, well, what are we going to do next? And if I think back from then and what I then went on to look at, we were fixing things such as, what about the hole in the ozone layer? Sometimes we forget that there have been other really significant things with the planet which we've had to get around. What about all of the pollution that we're putting into the sea? So these were all very serious things. And as I moved away from working offshore and in engineering and working on very large projects, it was more about how we comply with the Kyoto Protocol and all the protocols which have been going on since then. And I think that the issue of net zero has come, it's become a very serious issue in terms of the jeopardy that we find ourselves in. And for me, as someone who also is part of the transition, I transitioned from my jobs, which were in oil and gas, to net zero, initially actually the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. And it was really about how are we going to use technology to drive what we're doing. And I think I'm going to have to give a shout out to the difficulty of the task in front of us, because apart from getting the investment, we actually have to do the investment, and we actually have to execute the project, and we then have to operate safely for 50 to 70 years that equipment which we've put in. And that's an extraordinary amount of skills and working together that we actually already have here in the UK. Not every country has that. And so when I think about some of the amazing things that have been done, and we look at potentially building out offshore wind, the North Sea is one of the most harsh basins in the world to actually work in. It does require a lot of technology, it requires a lot of competence, and I'm talking about operational competence, the risk management, the ability to work with others to deliver. And so from that perspective, keeping those skill sets together so we can actually deliver on some of the things we're looking for is super important. So for now, I move on to energy transition. Energy transition, if I now just go to our mission, you can have a look at it there. But for me, energy transition is happening, and it's actually happening at pace, not always in the places that we expect it to happen or for the reasons. So to some extent, net zero has put the pace into energy transition, but it was always happening, and I'll show you that later. And it's always been happening because in various parts of the world, it always made good economic sense to do so. And remember that across the world, the oil and gas and coal is not evenly distributed. Some countries have been paying quite a lot for this when they already had resources such as solar, which they can now harness because of technology. And the other thing about energy transition, which is becoming more and more important, and that's very key, is that people want that to be a bit more local. They want their communities to benefit from it. They don't want everything imported to them. And so to some extent, they are looking at what their local resources are and what kind of technology can be used to harness this. And I'm going to show you an example of this later. I think the other thing about energy transition, and certainly when I first started looking at it, I thought, well, is this just a fuel switch? Are we switching from the equivalent of town gas to natural gas, as we did in the 70s? And actually, no, we're not. It doesn't look like that at all. And that has been one of the reasons which has made it difficult, because there aren't just a few players that we need to work with. We're now looking at something far more integrated, complex, and diverse. And perhaps the last thing I'll probably say around energy transition is that it's very important for us to be looking really at energy. So sometimes we use it synonymously with electricity. They are different things. So, for energy transition, we are looking at cleaning up how we produce electricity. But equally, we're looking at heating and cooling, and we're looking at transportation. And to some extent, the electricity that we generate, if we can get to the right price point, whether by scale, technology, will actually drive using electricity for heating and cooling, and indeed for transportation. It's never going to do it all, because we've got hard to decarbonize industries, we've got processes which are going to be more efficient using molecules rather than electrons, but nonetheless, if you look at the stats, if you can get the electricity cheap, you can move to 50% of your country's energy from electricity rather than around 30%. So look, we've all lent into this. The government has said, here are the targets. The targets are hard. Sometimes we're looking at them. Are they achievable? So what are we looking at? We are looking at heat pumps. And in particular, we're looking at networked heat pumps. So there's technology in there. But the ability to harness our geothermal energy, which is everywhere, is going to be super important. And we really need to lean into that, because that can be done everywhere as opposed to in localized places. We're looking at clean energy by 2030. And that at the moment, if you look in the UK, is around the existing projects which are actually in the portfolio. The journey from 2030 to 2050 will be far more difficult. So the 2030, even if it feels ambitious to us and feels unlikely, is still the easier task than the 2030 to 2050. And we're looking at the phase out of petrol and diesel cars. And we've seen some of these over the past few years. You can have a target when it was around boilers in the house, and if we're not ready with the infrastructure, then these targets move. And we're also looking at what we can do in terms of carbon capture. And given all of the exports and the use of fossil fuels that we have had, we've now ended up with 70 years of storage for CO2, which we can both use to store our own CO2, and actually we can be looking at this as an opportunity from Europe. And with Scotland, we've said we're going to do it a bit quicker. So we've said 2045. And if you look at the small print in what Scotland have said, it says it's 50% of its energy, not just power, but it's energy. And of course, this is, as I said, possible. As long as you get the price point right, you can use it for what you're doing in terms of heating and transportation, hence all the rollout of EV and the infrastructure, etc. If that price point doesn't make sense, and that's where it won't make economic sense, and we'll struggle with the investment. So look, I'm an optimistic person, by the way, and optimism means that I'm always looking to say, have we done enough? So perhaps not at the pace that I expected, but actually a lot has happened. And I don't think this is a linear process. So, if we look at what's been done in the last decade globally, or no, I think this is for the UK, we're talking about 100 billion that's been invested. And this is quite a good sum. We're looking at investment at the time that we're still talking about, have we got the planning, have we got the processes, etc. So still, there has been capacity to invest in the system. And if we look at what we're going to be looking at, things like offshore wind, 20 billion. And where I'm working at the moment at Net Zero Technology Centre, we're looking at how can we work alongside some of the other innovation agencies, such as the the Offshore Renewable Energies Catapult, about how we can take the technology that was developed in oil and gas for floating systems and move that, not quite seamlessly, but move that into floating wind. And I will say this floating technology is quite amazing. When I first started working, everything was really fixed. We then started to go into subsea completions, and then we started to do floating facilities. And I was interested to see the investment that's going into Radisson. That was one of the projects when I was working, when we were building what was called a floating production storage and offloading facility. It was a mega project at the time, and we did go around to the UK yards, including Radisson. We went to Harland and Wolff, we went to Starno in Spain, and we went to the Japanese yards, and we went to the Korean yards, and we ended up at the Korean yards. And we ended up at the Korean yards because when we went there, they were fully teched out. They could actually drive cost reduction of the order of 50 million into the project. And so it made economic sense. But unfortunately, this is how we lost that strong supply chain, because actually we did actually build out here in the UK quite a lot of FPSOs, but none of them actually, I think apart from Shillong, was done here. And then look, we have made progress in terms of carbon reduction, and we've made progress in what has been called green jobs. I think there'll be jobs in the future going forward. But what I'll say for NZTC is we've been part of that ecosystem. So we are a player in that alongside a lot of other people. And some of the key things that we've got, so we were given 180 million by the UK and Scottish government. We've managed to attract and leverage another 220 million from industry. And we've used that to invest in technology and into startups. And I saw, again, Volume up there. Volume is one of the companies we worked with early on. And in fact, we matched Volume with a company called Motion, who does wave devices to form an integrated solution for harnessing waves. And even though things like waves are energy is behind things like wind, etc., we are an island, there's a lot of them, and it's got a lot of energy in it. And I can assure you, when I look at some of the technologies that come through the technology centre, the innovators are breaking into how we're going to harness this properly. And it's all on the horizon. The other thing I think is striking is really, we've screened a lot of technology. So I tell people that I'm working at the birth of technology, so I'm always going to be more optimistic because I see fantastic solutions out there. The key for us is how we take people with ideas and match them with the people with the problem and have the solutions in the middle. So it's not unusual for people to come to us with ideas when the use case hasn't actually been defined. And we say, actually, I know someone with a problem like that. We could use that in a different way and actually solve that. And to some extent, we also work with industry, say, what are the problems that you have? Are you open to having that solved in a different way? View the problem slightly differently. And so that's one of the key roles that we play in terms of bringing together academia, industry, and government in terms of that funding to actually get some great solutions. We've helped 117 startups. We moved to a clean energy startup about 3 years ago. But if you look at we've commercialized 59 technologies from both the startups and those who are part of the technology support, which was called the solution centers. So in terms of, are we working with solutions which industry are interested? Yes, because we only work on solutions which industry will participate in. So they have to be at the table. And the other thing that we say is we prefer to work with solutions which industry will trial, because the trialing and deployment and risk reduction and proving in the field that technology works is the way that you get it onto a project. You can't do it another way. I used to work on projects, and it was very clear: do not be first of a kind on my project. It's too important. Someone else will have to do it. The only way for us to do this is to trial. But that isn't to say that we never did engage in what I'd call innovation. But just as an example of the difficulty of doing some of these things, if we had a new hull, for example, that we were trying to do, we would tank test that for 2 years. That's how patient it is when the projects are so big. So again, we can do this, we can lean into it, but I do think that the deployment and the field trialing and the scaling is where we need to spend quite a bit of time, both to reduce the risk, but also to reduce the cost. So here we are. We're in a net zero world powered by technology for innovation. I deliberately start with an oil and gas facility because we're here in Scotland. This is where we're starting. To some extent, this is where our transition is starting from. So, when we think about net zeros, one of the things is, for us, it is about net and zero. We're somewhat of a brown to green organization, so we do work with those who have a high carbon footprint to see how we can reduce it. That's the only way to actually get the emissions down. We are also working on the other side with what's going to replace that. How do we drive some of that technology? But the importance of brown to green can't be understated, because this area also needs quite a bit of investment. So how do we do that at Net Zero Technology Centre? So we've talked about the trials. The trials are very important to us. It's important to the developers. It's important to the end users. We also work on technology acceleration. So this is where we get small startups together. Sometimes we've actually created the startup ourselves. We've asked someone like Deep Science Ventures to go out. Here's the challenge. Please go out and get us a proper founder and a CTO to get after that. And one of the most amazing ones that we had is that we had a direct air capture challenge a few years back, and Mission Zero is one of the companies that came out of that. And actually they've gone on to win X prizes, etc. So that's been quite amazing. And then we're looking at rapid infrastructure development, and this is more about, well, if I've got infrastructure, if I've got technology, what infrastructure is it going in? And so we've been working with a coalition around how we, for example, use excess wind from, say, floating wind and take that hydrogen to our industrial heartland, say, for example, in Germany. And then, of course, we do strategic thought leadership, which is, can we do some horizon scanning to see what's over the horizon? So I think here, I just wanted to say, why is it going to happen? So this is Norway. This is hydropower. They've been doing hydropower for a long time. And of course, as you know, they're hydrocarbon resource rich. They did this because it made sense. And of course, I suppose it's easier to sell the gas rather than the water. But this is quite important. But I could go through other, if I look at Uruguay, they're at 90% clean electricity using wind and hydro. And last year, they went 10 months with a clean grid. And then if I look at the North Sea, probably the best place in the world to do the floating. And between the UK and Denmark, we've committed to 2030 for that, and the Netherlands 2035. With the right investment and focus, we could capture that market. And then if I look at somewhere like China, they actually do have quite a lot of technology. They're producing twice the amount than the rest of the world put together. Their storage technology is actually quite advanced, and if you look at the Chilean project that's going on, a 14.5 gigawatt hour battery, that battery will do the peak power for the entire country. So the technology is moving on very quickly. And then here's Namibia. And here in Namibia, what we have is they came to us as a delegation. About 50% of the Namibians have access to electricity, the rest have nothing. So the question was, how can we change this? How can we move from the very large solar panels to something very small with a battery so that they could desalinate water locally, so that they can have clean cooking, and so that they can actually have light in the evening so that their children can work. So everyone's problem is different, but they've got lots of sun, so that's what they do. So as we go forward for NZTC, we've got these areas, renewables, which you would expect, low carbon, hydrogen, and alternative fuels being a very good transition fuel if we can do it, industrial decarbonisation and carbon capture. But underpinning all of this is also digital. It's the automation, it's the autonomous systems, it's the robotics, it's the data, it's the AI. And that wrapper that we'll put will give us the innovation. It will give us more energy security, and to some extent, it'll give us security if we do it locally enough. So I just wanted to go through a few of the examples. So we've got Pulsate here. I remember when they came to TechX, two technicians from offshore, great ideas. They worked with us for about 3 years, and now they've just sold their company to a very large company. My preference is that they grow, but sometimes the idea and the product they have, it's just too good. So Pulsate, very pleased for them. And then if we look at Acua, this is about trying to monitor and take data from the sea. They started with that outline there, and look where they are now. And again, Scotland-based, great ideas. How do they get that to market? And then if I then look at our NZTC, we're coming to the end of our funding. I'm the CEO, so I have to make a plug for that, because you'd expect that. So we are going to be, we've gone to the government to ask for continued funding. And our funding is to deliver that. So it's about new jobs. It's about the startups that we can create. It's about commercializing new technology and really working with industry to unlock even more funding. And it's not just industry funding. We are looking for investor funding as well. And I'll take the last one, which is Myriad Wind. That was from cohort 5. This is a next generation multi-rotor wind turbine. We like this so much that we put our own money into it, actually. And what's nice about this, again, this was 3 guys with an idea here in Scotland. And as you know, the wind turbines have been getting longer. They're now like the wing of an aircraft. But actually, the question is, they can't continue to get larger. What about them getting smaller? So now they've got this device where actually the turbulence of all of this actually helps to actually generate even more power. So we've got this device. It started, what do we do? That kind of device is now available. And that's a kind of device which you can install yourself. You don't need huge installation. You don't need huge manufacturing. These now are devices which are small enough for local communities to use. And that we expect will be one of these big export products to go to somewhere where you're looking for local power. So I'll come to the end, a net zero world powered by technology innovation.
Goodness, thank you very much. Here we go. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. Can we get another round of applause for Myrtle, please? Thank you. I knew I should have worn flats today. I would have got up here much sooner. If you do have any questions, please make sure you pop them into Slido, and I will put them to Myrtle, because we have a good 10-minute chat now. So it was interesting to hear about some of the investment that has been made. And I sort of didn't know whether to initially kick off with this question, but I thought I'll give you a hard one, which is, I guess, projecting a little bit onto the future, because as we know, any changes we see in the US trickle down, and eventually we will experience those here in the UK. And something that's unavoidable is the frack, 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 drill, drill, drill message coming from our new president, Trump. So when you were talking a little bit about the investment you've seen, you were explaining the ecosystem, You mentioned £180 million of funding has been received from the Scottish Government. Do you see that changing? Is it going to be harder in order for you to attract capital from government going forward?
So yeah, I mean, if you just listen to the news, I must admit, it must be difficult. I mean, I wouldn't like to be Rachel Reeves. She probably wanted that job all her life, and now it's really tough. So look, we've just put our best foot forward to ask for the funding. We think that it's compatible with the growth agenda. We think it's compatible with the jobs, and it's compatible with net zero. So we've put together the business case, put a lot of effort into that, and what our job really is to try to sell that. But we're also making sure that we're working with some of the other areas where funding's available, such as with GB Energy. So we're waiting to work with them. They're in their startup phase, and we'll be seeing them shortly to talk about what we can do to support that emerging technology agenda.
Thank you. And I realise I do not want to monopolise my time with you on stage as much as I would actually really like to. So if anyone does have a question, pop your hand up. We have 2 roaming mics, so we can actually get the mic to you if anyone has a question. There's one just at the back.
Hi there, Myrtle. It's Jacqueline Redden from the Scottish National Investment Bank. My question relates to recently a lot of the IOCs, the oil and gas companies, have rolled back on the renewable targets, which of course is a pity. But on the synthetic fuels and the low carbon fuels, are they still interested? And what opportunity lies there for Scotland?
Okay, thank you. So because I won't comment on any rollback, but I will comment on alternative fuels. So look, we've been working with Siemens on alternative fuels for the past couple of years, actually also part funded by ScotGov. I have to give them credit. And part of that has been, how can we get these fuels tested on what we call old technology? So we're looking at RB211s and Avons, which have been around for 25 years, but are not at the end of their useful life, so that we can make the transition with these fuels. So I see the opportunity for this as quite big. We've got terminals sitting on our coast, which could be used for some of these alternative fuels. People are trained up to know how to use them, and actually we understand them far better. So for me, it's about the manufacturing. If I was starting over again, I think I would become an entrepreneur and build a factory or a plant with alternative fuels. And I know that obviously there is a project that's been supported recently looking at exactly that for one of the sites in the northeast.
Thank you very much for your question. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions come in on Slido, and one from Anonymous asks, what is the one barrier you'd like to remove in terms of Scotland's progress to net zero?
The one barrier?
The one barrier. Plenty. You just have to choose one.
Look, I am only going to choose one. There are many barriers, but I work in the technology arena. So really, I'm really sincere when I talk about this collaboration and how important it is. Because when we did this industrialization before, there were just a few companies and they could do what they needed to do internally. Now we've got an array of companies. So for me, it's about this collaboration to test and scale the technology. And in particular, that means we really need to lean into what we're going to do on floating wind. If we're going to do it, we need to do it, irrespective of what's happening in the US, because we were already a basin that was a mature basin. So we always were going to have to do a transition. And this is the right time when we've still got the skills and the supply chain to deliver it.
And Scotland still has the 2045 target.
And Scotland still has the more ambitious targets, yes.
Thank you. Again, if there's any questions on the floor, just pop your hand up. Otherwise, we can go some more from Slido. So we've been asked here, what do you think the next generation role is in this?
So look, I see the next generation all the time. I mean, last year we had some fantastic entrepreneurs come through TechX, and sometimes they look scarily young. I have to say, are they of age? So, the young people are very innovative. I'd say some of the older people are innovative, but in terms of not knowing enough to know that things are barriers, you get that with the young. I saw some technology, I can't talk about it too much because they're IP, which would completely revolutionize how we do electrolysis. And I looked at this and I thought, my goodness, this is going back to chemical engineering and reimagining how you do the chemical engineering. And I think, why didn't we think of doing that? We've been doing all kinds of odd things. So I think that the young have the advantage that they don't know how it should be done sometimes, and hence they are more innovative and brave with their thinking.
Excellent. And then obviously you can't reveal too much.
Yes.
But are there areas that you're keen to hear from innovative companies, or equally are there areas that you have too many companies showing interest? This is a question that's come from Slido, so thank you to whoever brought this forward.
Look, at the moment, I don't think there's too many. We're just not far enough on the journey for us to say that there's too many. Okay. We're always, we get fantastic technology, but if someone has an even more disruptive, fantastic one, which will, someone came to us with a battery that could, support half of the UK, of course we'd support it. So for me, we're interested in all of this. Going forward, I think that the ecosystem around how we do things remotely, especially if we do offshore floating wind, because we're not going to have people offshore, how we do these, the autonomous and robotics, how we're going to control it with AI, and how we're going to secure those facilities becomes even more important. It really is important that it's not just energy security, it's security, because the ecosystem for the digital, I think, is an important thing we need to lean into. And I was speaking to my colleague yesterday, and she was saying that we've heard of ChatGPT, and said yes. We've heard of DeepSeek, yes. Have we heard of Deep AI? And it was like, well, what's that? And that's a European version. So why don't we know about this, and why are we not harnessing some more of the ecosystem which is available?
So there's plenty out there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, does anyone have a question they'd like to put to Myrtle in the room? Let's get some energy injected. I know it's Monday morning, everyone, but I'm sure there are people out there. And if you are submitting them on Slido, thank you very much. But please do feel free. Be brave. Get involved. We'd love to hear from you this morning. So we have another question that's come from Slido anonymously, which asks, what are your thoughts on the right balance between investing in green energy production versus investment in emerging carbon capture tech?
So look, I think we need them both. I had this discussion that it's not a linear process, so we might all rock up in 2040 with great technology, but still wanting to actually remove even more CO2 from the atmosphere in order to manage this. So I think we need to do both. I think with the carbon capture technology, we need to have some plentiful, cheap renewables to do it, and hence it's all part of the same package. But we do need to, I think direct air capture has its role. And I was speaking to a team from Brazil, and they have, they use a lot of hydro and solar, and they have a huge amount of surplus renewables every day. And what they're looking to do is, what can they do? Is it going to be converted to hydrogen for storage, or should they be using that for direct air capture because it's essentially free? So we really need to lean into this. I don't think that we're not sufficiently advanced with this to not have pull every lever that we can.
Thank you. Interesting. You mentioned hydro. We have another question that has come from Slido, and it is about that, because you did go into projects overseas that have been utilizing hydro energy. The question here is, why are we not leveraging that? So, it's more predictable than wind. What then are the barriers that you see in this country, or certainly in the UK?
So I think predictability is one thing, and with hydro, yes, you can turn it on when you want to. I suppose it's all about what is the ultimate capacity that can be supplied from that. And I don't know the exact numbers for hydro, but certainly the numbers for wind, given that we have the most prospective wind resource in Europe, it's clear that we need to get into that. I'd be happy with some hydros too. To be honest, I'm an engineer, so I support all the the forms of energy and getting that rolled out. And I think that's what's important.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you to James Blakey from Moda, who has sent in the next question, which is, what role should the built environment play in reaching net zero?
Are we talking about...
Presume homes, built environment?
I can talk about, I suppose, local power plants and actually... So look, I think it's really important. If you look at some of the challenges we have around the grid, clearly if you don't need to go into the grid, would be very useful. And when I look at, for example, I think it's India, they've made, I think they're putting like 10 million, they're going to use rooftop solar on 10 million homes. So they've just made it an ambitious project, 500 gigawatts. So, you know, we do need to do things like that. And then some of these more interesting things around district heating, networked pumps, etc. These things don't need the grid, the constrained parts of the grid. We really need to look at these. And these are real, genuine areas where if you do put them in, bills will go down as long as the electricity that's supporting them is affordable.
Myrtle, thank you. Now I'm going to open up to the floor one last time, so you have one more opportunity to be brave. Would anyone like to put a question? Yes, we've got one over in the corner. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you. Is there a skills gap in the market that needs to be addressed for the transition? And if so, what jobs are needed?
So I think just in general, I mean, reports were done last year, some of them by a notable one by Professor Paul Deleu from the Energy Transition Institute in Aberdeen. And we are in this Goldilocks, he calls it the Goldilocks period, where we do have the skills, but we're increasingly losing the skills between 2024 and 2028. So that is the period that we really need to make sure that we are building out what we need to transfer skills and jobs to some extent. But in terms of, you know, the skills, I think that there's always going to be a skills gap because some of the things we're doing are new, but it's not the majority of what we're looking at because some of the jobs are standard. We still need the same accountancy, legal support, engineering. We've got geoscientists that understand all of these things. A lot of these things are available. And even if there is a small skills gap, it's one of these things which can be addressed by CPD rather than a new degree or anything. So for me, the issue isn't really the skills gap, it's the pace of the transition to make sure we don't lose the skill sets that we have at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the question. And thank you very much. We have one last one that's come in at the front. Can we get a mic up front, please? And we'll just squeeze this one in. And it's come in from Enoch. Thank you.
This is working.
There we go.
Hi, Myrtle. Thank you very much. So you mentioned something earlier around how you've seen some young people coming into the process, coming up with new ideas. Has that happened by happenstance, or is there an intentional effort to get more ideas and more input from sort of the younger generation? Again, as you said, they are coming in with, should I say, clean mind to the point where they could come up with more innovative ideas. So is there something intentional happening in that area, or is it just you're seeing what you're seeing?
A little bit of both, but even though we of course participate in STEMs and career ready, the ideas that we're getting is for the person who's sitting in their bedroom concerned about something and finding solutions, getting together with friends and colleagues or people at university say we've got ideas. So we see quite a lot of that. They tend to need quite a lot of support, especially if the teams are very technical. We've actually lost good technology from actually having good tech teams, but actually teams that can't work together, and hence that support that needs to go in to actually move a technology through the technology readiness level. But I would say that, we go out, but we're agnostic. Look, I'm at the latter part of my career, and I've still got ideas. So what we're saying is we need all the ideas. Some of them will be more focused on problem solving because you know what some of the problems are, And at the other end, some of them will be innovative and unconstrained by what the problems are.
Excellent final question. Thank you very much for that. And I think that really helped to underpin sort of where you sit in the ecosystem of all this, because often, even from an investor perspective or a business perspective, you are trying to find out what the lay of the land is and what the ecosystem is. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and thank Myrtle Dawes. Thank you. Thank you so much.